Hi, this is Josh Marshall from TPM Media. It's Thursday, December 27, 2007. This is episode 6 of our weekly 2008 campaign roundup. Now, just last week, I told you that I thought Mitt Romney had the best chance of being the Republican nominee this year. For all the problems he's having, both in Iowa and now in New Hampshire, every other frontrunner so far this year has tumbled down in the polls, and it's left one guy still standing, and that's Mitt Romney. Now, what a difference a week makes. I still think the odds are still best for Mitt Romney, but just in the last week, going back maybe a few weeks, but just in the last week, it's crystallized as there's been a resurgence for John McCain. Now, there's been signs of this for a while, talk of it, but where it's really shown up concretely is in the polls in New Hampshire. Now, last week we showed you these trend line bar graphs that are done by Professor Charles Franklin for pollster.com. Now, the one I'm showing you now is from New Hampshire, the Republican primary in New Hampshire. You can see that brown line of the guy in the lead is Mitt Romney, and the orange line that's kind of going down all year, bottoms out a little while ago, and then starts to come back up just recently, that's John McCain. Now you look there, and Mitt Romney is still pretty far ahead of John McCain, but remember, this is a trend line chart, so it takes into account past polls too. If you go and look at the 4 most recent polls, 3 of those 4 polls show John McCain with no more than 4 points behind Mitt Romney. Now let's look at one more line on that chart. It's the purple line that you see going across consistently for some time and then starting to drop off just recently. That's Rudy Giuliani, and as you can see, McCain is surging as Giuliani is dropping. Now, that makes a certain amount of sense since both of these guys have based their campaigns on hawkish foreign policy and at least relatively moderate positions on social issues for the Republican Party. So that's where we are in New Hampshire. Mitt Romney has been ahead for a long time. It's a key part of his strategy to win big in New Hampshire, but right now it's basically neck and neck between him and John McCain. Now, with all that, you might figure that McCain would be in New Hampshire every day until January 8th, primary day, trying to guarantee that he pulls out a win in New Hampshire. That's actually not what he's doing. McCain changed his plans and scheduled a final end-of-the-year blitz in Iowa. He's in Iowa this week, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. There's a little evidence, but not much, that McCain is starting to build in Iowa. But what this is really about is that third place, conceivably even second, but definitely third, seems within reach for John McCain in Iowa. And if he can pull that off, a big media story going into the New Hampshire primary will be that this guy, John McCain, who's been the butt of jokes for the last few months in this race, came back and won third place in a state that he was barely even campaigning on. That's going to create a tidal wave of great free media for him in the final 5 days before New Hampshire. And he figures better to see what he can do in Iowa rather than spend those 3 days campaigning in New Hampshire. Now, there's 2 other factors to take into account with John McCain. Let's say McCain wins second or third place in Iowa and then wins in New Hampshire. He doesn't have a lot of money. His campaign has basically been on life support now for months. He's obviously got a lot of national name recognition, though. And there, again, 2 factors to take in mind. The press loves John McCain, and the press is always waiting for the next chapter of the story. If the next chapter of the story is the comeback of John McCain, the national political press loves this guy so much they will eat this alive. On the other hand, you've got another factor, and that is that the Republican establishment in Washington does not like John McCain. They made their peace with him earlier this year when they thought he was a front runner, but there's so many things that happened during the late 90s and the early part of this decade that there's not a lot of love lost between John McCain and the big players in Washington, D.C. So where does that leave things for John McCain? For all the enmity that the Republican establishment has for him, what's happened over the course of this last 6 months is that everybody else in the GOP race has just flamed out and proven just to be jokes, really. It's happened to Rudy Giuliani, it's happened to Fred Thompson, it's happening to Mike Huckabee. For all that enmity, a lot of them are going to think that John McCain is the one who stands the best shot of beating the Democratic nominee next November. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll tell you what's happening on the Democratic side of the race.
I'm from grassfire.com.
Now the Democrats. Now, this race on the Democratic side is much closer than anything that's happening on the Republican side of the aisle. In both Iowa and New Hampshire, it's really just too close to call. The 2 front runners, Obama and Hillary, are still neck and neck in both states. And even John Edwards, who's clearly a relatively distant third, is still enough in it that perhaps if he were to come in second or even first in Iowa, that could totally shake things up in New Hampshire. Now let's go back to our trend line graphs from pollster.com. As you can see here, the orange line, that's Barack Obama. Just at the very last minute here, he has taken the lead over Hillary Clinton. Now here is the New Hampshire graph, and you can see he's not quite caught up with Hillary Clinton yet, but he's really close. They're coming down. It's basically going to, seems like from this graph, it's going to be a photo finish between Hillary and Barack Obama. Now here's one more wild card. On the 23rd, a poll was completed by American Research Group in Iowa that showed Hillary breaking that trend that had Obama rising and opening up a 15-point lead over Obama. Now that grabbed a lot of attention, and it seemed to show that Obama's surge had ended and Hillary was moving clearly back into the lead. Now at the moment, that's the most recent poll out of Iowa. But the problem is, no other poll has picked up that trend, and there's a number of problems with the American Research Group poll. If you want to see more about this, check out pollster.com, where Mark Blumenthal discusses some of those problems. One of the key ones is, though, is that polling right around a major holiday is inherently wobbly. It often gives bad results. So at the moment, we really don't know whether that poll is just an outlier or whether something major has changed and Hillary is moving dramatically into the lead. For the moment, I think it's safest to assume that that poll's an outlier, partly because the ARG poll has consistently had Hillary Clinton a little further ahead than other polls going back for several months. But we won't know until the next public polls come out, which will probably be tomorrow. So that's where we are, with 4 days left in 2007 and 6 days before the Iowa caucus. Suddenly, improbably, it's looking like a race between Mitt Romney and John McCain on the Republican side, at least for the nomination, if not in Iowa. And on the Democratic side, too close to call, with the key wild card of that ARG poll that no one quite knows what to make of. I'm Josh Marshall from TPM Media, and we'll talk to you next week.